All right. Well, we're gonna record this so that way, if anyone is coming a little bit late and has any questions and such that they missed, they can always contact me at any time. If you're coming in now, be sure to take a moment just to mute yourself just for the session. That way, if you do have any questions, such we can do it through the chat directly, or just let me know. And I think you should be able to unmute yourself and you can ask your question as well. And all right, jump in and talk a little bit about Policy Map. So again, the session is being recorded. I will share this with your team at the end of the session. That way you can rewatch it anytime. My name is Phil Vu, and I'm with Policy Map. If you're not familiar with Policy Map, we are basically just an online data mapping tool. We were started as a nonprofit, and our goal was to help users visualize data that we probably use in a day-to-day process. And we created a really simple tool, and that tool is Policy Map. So what I'm going to show you today is basically some of the really unique features of Policy Map, as well as some of the different data sets that might be of interest, in particular for your case. And then if you have any very specific ways you want to use the tool or any specific data sets, I encourage a little bit of interaction. If you can, I do apologize. Car in the back. If you're not aware, the tool itself is it's what we call an enterprise license. So everyone at CLEVNET has a very specific link, and that link is will be available here. Your admin does have access to add and remove users at any time, so that way if you do not have access, make sure you contact your admin from this link right here. And then this enterprise license is basically a very specific tool that is just built for your area. It is a national tool though, so while the initial zoom is into the Cleveland area, you can also do this analysis anywhere across the US. The default tool itself is the mapping tool. And the goal of this page really is the ability to visualize data. So the map you can see is you can pan around, you can zoom in and out, some very basic stuff. The location bar then in the very top is the ability for you to navigate to a place in your area. So you can either type an address, or you can type in a city or location. So we can go to some place like Lakewood and such. And then what this will do is navigate to the area and then basically draw the boundary for that particular area. So this is the city boundary for Lakewood. These are also common boundaries that exist in Policy Map. So if you type a zip code, you can type in a zip code, you can type in a county and such. You can also overlay those boundaries using the boundaries menu here. And this will give you a list of all the different boundaries that we use in Policy Map, and then give you that ability to overlay those. So if you want to see what zip codes look like in a given area, this allows you to see that, oh, Lakewood actually has one zip code. But you can, in this case, see the different zip codes that are in the area itself. We also understand that if you are using a mapping type tool, you probably have some really unique boundaries that you work with. One of the really unique boundaries we do load for the CLEVNET dataset is actually the Ohio Library Services. We do have an update to this, so it is being updated at this time, but this is the current one we have for all of Ohio, as you can see. But you can also make your own. So that way, if you don't want to use any of the ones that are preloaded, you can then use what we call the custom regions, which is a little button in the very top here. And this allows you to do a couple of different things when it comes to making a custom regions. For us, a custom region is any unique boundary that you wanted to draw. And there's very specific ways to make those boundaries. So the Create Region tab here allows you to choose a couple of really unique functions. The draw feature is just that. You're just going to draw on top of the map. And in this case, you're simply dropping the points of the vertices of your custom region. You can still zoom in. You can pan around to get as close as you want. I always draw really complicated boundaries. You can see it's pretty and then, of course, once you close the custom region, it'll give you a chance to then save it and give it a custom name. You can edit the boundaries, changing the colors, the transparency. as well as even changing the shape. So if you make a mistake in this boundary, click on Edit Shapes, and this allows you to redraw the boundaries itself. So a drawn custom region is really unique in the policy map tool because it doesn't care about any general boundaries you might be familiar with. So it doesn't care that they cross zip codes, cities, counties, and such. It will care about those boundaries when you want to download data for it or collect data or even generate a report for it. It'll use a really simple 50% coverage rule to contain the boundaries that you're going to use for that. Which also means that sometimes you maybe want to make a boundary of predefined boundaries. Maybe you want to create a custom region of maybe zip codes or so, or even other counties in the state. So assemble custom region is just that. It's the ability to take the boundaries that exist in the policy map tool. And then from this, you can initially use the current zoom level that we're having, but we can change this to use any of the other boundaries that are in policy map. So that way, if you want to make a really neat boundary based off the zip codes that you're trying to capture in a given area, or if you want to do a much more statewide research, you can do counties in your samples. But this function allows you to just simply click onto the map. And if you make a mistake, you can deselect areas at any time. But when you're done, you click on the save and continue. And again, you have the ability to give it a little bit of customizations and a name. And then, of course, the last function of custom regions is the radius, which is probably another one that you might use more often. The radius feature is really neat because you can make a radius around a couple of different functions. The options is either to type an address of a place that you're looking at, maybe your local library or one of the libraries you're working in directly. Or in this case, you can actually define the radius and just click onto the map. So maybe we want to get a 3.5 mile radius from this very specific area down by Independence. And this will simply just create that radius. And you can adjust this boundary so that way you make it larger and smaller. But again, you have the same abilities to give it a custom name. So custom regions are really neat in the tool. Besides being able to visualize and create these really unique boundaries that you might be working in, they also have a little bit of customization behind them within these bubbles, as well as the ability to share it with other users. So the share one's really neat because there's a couple of ways to get to it. We'll talk about the download features in a moment. But you can share from directly within your menu here. So these are actually all boundaries that were created by other users, myself in particular in my account, but then Hillary created maybe one here to share with other users or share with themselves. So that's the really neat feature of the share feature, is that you can actually share it either with everyone in the CLEVNET Enterprise license. So that way anyone else can come to the boundaries and it'll list in their My Region menu. But you can also share it with selected individuals, giving you a chance to add each person's email address, and that person will only get access to those boundaries. And the unique benefit of that share is that they don't have to recreate these boundaries at all. It'll give them the ability to go in here and do their own analysis based on the boundaries you already created. And that analysis can include things like generating a report, downloading data just for this given area, seeing data in a tabular format, and you can actually visualize data by clipping just those particular sessions. All right. So that's kind of the basics of really the map itself, and in particular the boundaries. We're going to jump into a little bit about data and how you use and visualize that. So again, if you have any questions, and I do apologize, I did mute everyone coming in, but if you do have questions, they are done through the chat window. Just type them in there, and I'm happy to answer anything. And if you want to see something in particular, I'm happy to show that as well. But once you have your maps situated to the area that you might be working in, be it Lakewood or even Brooklyn in this area, the next step is really adding data. And that data are these tabs above the map. And as you can see, we have a lot of data in the policy map tool. We, as an organization, wanted to always be able to cover different types of industries. So the basics of our nonprofit research really covers very basic demographic data sets, but then we started expanding to health information and of course federal programs. So all that covers within the variety of different categories. If you want to get a very easy summary of some of these categories, this data directory link on the top here, which I'll send to you in a follow-up email with the video. But this page here is a neat place to start if you're not familiar with the tool or you just want to get a little bit of information about some categories of interest, because this is basically just a very simple summary of those categories. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the table of contents mimics the categories we'll talk about when we go back to the tool. All that means is that if you wanted to find out, let's say, what's in something called quality of life, it'll tell you that in this category, you'll find grocery retail locations, farmers markets, brownfields or fund sites, libraries, nonprofits, but then also really unique data sets related to the quality of life in a given area, crime rates for that area, how people get to work, type of internet access, food access, such. So these, as a category for us, we thought would be useful to understand the quality of life in a given area. This page is really helpful for a couple of other things too. The one big important part besides telling you what data is available in that category, it's going to tell you what years are available. So that way, if you're trying to find historical data or you're looking for data that's much more current, you can view this and see which ones might have more relevant data sets. And then finally, when it comes to the category of data itself, you'll learn in the tool that we have two types of data that you can interact with in PolicyMap. And they're really simple because they're broken out by the first sub menu in most of these categories. And so in this case, for quality of life, the first sub menu is something very simple, like brownfields or Superfund sites, or in this case, libraries and other nonprofits. So for us, what we call a point data set is just that. It's a point on the map that represents an address for that particular data set. So these little bow ties and the legend says these are libraries that come from MILS. And then as with anything in PolicyMap, you should be able to click onto it, get more information about that data as well. And so that's always going to be the first submenus. And after that is really just what we call data layers. And data layers are the colorful maps that you might be familiar with when it comes to looking at data visually on a map. For us, a data layer, all it means is that the data is aggregated to a geography, and we'll talk about geographies as we do this. But in this case, you can see that layers and points have their own legends, and the legends are really unique because you can do some very unique customizations when it comes to using that data. So let me just give you a little bit of overview of some of these categories. Hopefully they give you some ideas of maybe why data might be in those categories, and we'll pick on some maybe really unique data sets itself that you might be of interest. Otherwise, demographics probably is variables that you're familiar with when it comes to data in general. This is things like total population, race, ethnicity, age, but then you'll get some really, really neat data sets related to, besides foreign-born, but also language spoken at home, household dynamics. You can start seeing types of households that are with or without children. You can see households that are with grandparents and children. So a lot of different ways to understand the households in those particular areas. So for us, demographics is really about the people and persons in a given place. Some easy variables related to income and spending. So the first category, subcategory is income. This will basically list all the more common indicators that are considered income. The most common one, though, is what is called household income. So all households is most used. Because of that, the census breaks out household incomes to some really unique submenus, things like head of households, type of incomes, very specific income brackets. So how many households make less than 50,000? How many households fall within these ranges? There are other ways to look at income, which is the spending side of it. So instead of seeing where how much a household makes, you can also see where households spend their dollars. And this is the consumer expenditure report. or spending habits. And so this is a really neat survey from the census that asks how people spend their dollars, and then we categorize that into these really unique categories, including total for housing, total for food, away from home, alcohol, education. So this is a really neat data set because most of these variables were pre-pandemic. So the most recent ACS that should come out later this month will have some updates to these variables. I talked about quality of life. Just to give you an idea of what's in here, it's a really, really neat category. It's a lot of data sets that we use internally to better understand neighborhoods that we work in and service. And that ranges from everything from computer access to how people get to work or how type of transportation people have, as well as some of these really unique methodologies that talk about flood risks and vulnerabilities and such. So think about quality of life as a variety of different variables for that neighborhood, even access to foods in that case, and then parks and land use. So just give you an idea of where you can find some of these data based on these categories. If you don't want to dig through the categories themselves, there's a lot of data to interact with. You can always use the other search on the other side of the bar. So understand that the location search is going to zoom the map to the place that you're working in, whereas the data search allows you to say, we're looking at, let's find people that, goodness, we'll do something simple with income. If you type in a keyword like income, it'll pull up all the different variables in our metadata in our database that has income in that term. So that way you can pull up a very simple data set and say, what's the household income in a given area? So we always suggest using the data search first. At the very least, it'll give you an idea of where you can find maybe certain types of data sets of interest, but then really the categories would give you much broader picture sometimes. One of my favorite data sets to talk about really when it comes to looking at a given area is race and ethnicities, mainly because the census, when it wants you to look at racial data, it wants you to look at one race at a time. And then they started grouping together some race and multi-race persons and such. But a lot of people really want to see how race and ethnicities all really mix together. And so with that, this predominant race is one of my favorite layers because you get this really colorful map, but the colorful map also gives you some very neat context. So in this case, anything in the green are areas that are predominantly Black. Anything in the blue are areas that are predominantly white, and then the red is Hispanic, and then purple would be Asian. And then there are others in here that generally, depending on where you live, populate that. So this is a really neat map for some cities. In this case, you can, if you know Cleveland a little bit, or even some of your other surrounding neighborhoods, you probably understand the demographics of the city and how the city is broken up sometimes by race and ethnicity. Other really unique data sets, really for some of our library users, is the language spoken at home. This is a neat one for a lot of libraries to try to better understand what type of collections they might hold for those neighborhoods based on other languages available. So obviously the most common language in the US is English. Spanish is really close in that process, in that survey. But if you remove those two really dominant languages in the US, you get this really unique mosaic map. But what you'll see is the third most common language after English and Spanish, and then you can start seeing the different neighborhoods and the common languages for this particular area. So this area down here between Valley View, Independence, and Seven Hills is predominantly Polish in the common language area, and then Italian underneath that. So if you combine this with something simple like library locations, you probably know your library locations already. So if you were to zoom into your neighborhoods, maybe this will give you an idea of secondary languages. We have a couple of different libraries that use this as a research for mobile libraries. It gives them a chance that if they were to drive a library to a neighborhood, they can think about adding a multi-language collection in that mobile library in that process. In that same context, Besides language explorer at home, if you look at things like foreign born and where people are from, excluding Mexico, again, you get a really neat mosaic, and then this might, you can see that it's very close. So German, Italian, and such in those areas. So while the maps are really colorful and pretty, it does hopefully give you an idea of some more information that you might not have already known about certain neighborhoods, and give you more information about those places, just on the demographic side. And then the other really unique variable that's also within quality of life then is access to the internet. Because from this, it's a neat survey from the census that basically asks how people have access to the internet. And in some cases, this really helps understand how you have outreach to your particular neighborhoods. Because if you look at some place that does not have a computer at all, that means that majority of the users that have access to any type of marketing or outreach, they probably are only using their smartphones or tablets and such. So depending on how you want to outreach them, computers, and if they don't have computers at home, then they probably need a resource in that case to go to. So in these places areas, you'll see some have 27%, so almost 1 in 5 persons or households do not have a computer. So for them, a resource like a library to have access to a computer to do any forms or works and such is invaluable for their access. And then the legend, when you add data to the map, gives you quite a bit of control of that information that's being shown. So right now we're looking at the percentage of people that don't have a computer in a given area, but maybe you want to find out what that number looks like as a value instead of just the percentage of persons. And so the legend for layers allows you to change that from percent to number. And in this case, it'll show you the number of people in that place that do not have access to a computer. So while the percentage is 1 in 5, it represents about 370 households in that particular area. You can also simplify some of this information. So if you want to stick with percentages for now, we can change the ranges and say we just want to see all the high ranges, areas above 60% on the map, combine the two, or you can even do something more powerful and actually make your own cut points. So that way, if you click on the ranges, it releases all the fields, and you can slide the values if you wanted to, or even change the numbers to something much simple and say, we want to look at places that have a really, so with something like 25% of the households that don't have a computer, and then we'll go down to 10%. And so now you really start seeing, identifying very specific neighborhoods that have a lot of households. In this case, 1 in 4 households do not have a computer for their needs. And then anything related to the mapping side of PolixMap allows you to download this map. So the print function you see on the bottom right here will give you this really neat modal. And within the modal, you have the ability to pan the map around still and still zoom in and out. And the purpose of this is that what you see in this window here is exactly what you're going to download. So if you wanted to add a map into maybe a grant application or any kind of research or just the general studies of a given area, the print allows you to do just that. With this, you also have a little bit of customization, allowing you to change the font size, change the font itself. So that way, if you're making a map for, again, a program or a project or presentation, you have the ability to label that. You can also just simply remove because the legend itself has a lot of that data. And then the format, of course. All right, let me take a small break and see if there's any questions or data that you want to see particular. I'm going to dig into some of these other features that might be of interest. again, I think everyone is muted for the Zoom call, but if you have any questions, you're welcome to just type them into the chat window, either to everyone or directly to me at any time. Okay. So the goal of the maps page, again, is basically the ability to visualize data and just trying to give you an idea of some of the really unique functions. As you can see, you can add data, you can edit that data, and then in the end, you want to be able to download that map and use it into your own work and analysis. And there's so much data to interact with. I try not to overwhelm too much in the session because we do cover a lot. But if there's any particular data set, I'm happy to take through it, but I just want to show you some pretty common ones as well. Another resource of the tool then is to actually just get to the data. Maybe the map isn't where you want to collect the information from or use data from. So one of the other features is basically using these other functions at the very top. And reports is a really neat feature because it allows you to take some of these different data sets that are from these other categories. And what we do is we group data together into a report. And each one of these reports is a grouping of similar data sets for that purpose. So a community profile report you might probably use more often. It is a demographic report, really. These are just really unique variables related to the demographics of a given area. And then there's a health report that we worked with hospital systems to make. So it's a neat one if you want to look at that. And then, of course, our roots are in the housing side. So we have a mortgage and a rental report. So let's say we go back to, and then, of course, if you make a custom region in the tool, it'll be listed here. And this allows us to then say, I want to get a report of a radius around that address that we clicked on the map. And then what this is going to do is aggregate the data within that radius. It'll give us some context about the area. So these are the boundaries that are being used for aggregation. These are the school districts that it sits in, the congressional districts that it touches. And then it starts giving us information about that place. So within that radius, the population was 24,000 in 2000, about 24,000 in 2010, 23,000 in 2020. So it's pretty much pretty stable. We'll have the 2020 census in here fairly soon. It's technically not fully released, but when it is released, we'll have it into reports as a reference. But then we go through the report, the rest of it, and you'll see that this is, again, a really neat report to understand the community of that area. So the demographics of the area, was predominantly white, and then the different breakouts for other races and ethnicities. The age distribution, so it's a pretty high number for under 18. The breakout of household incomes is a moderately income ranged areas. You have a comparison to the county and the state that it's in. So at the very least, you'll see how this area compares to the overall state and county. Immigrations, family types, housing information, and then we actually start going into the community part. So the top part is really talking about the person that live in that particular area that you are collecting data for, and the bottom is really starts talking about the overall area they live in. So vacancy information, how many people own a home, employment and job types and such. So reports you can just download directly. And then again, you can create other reports as well. But the Go reports is unique because it's trying to give you as much information as possible based on a place that you're looking for. You can also download data that's in the policy map tool. So if we go back to our custom region and once you have a boundary up, you can type in a boundary in the very top. You can add a custom region if you wanted to, but from this interface, if you wanted to, let's say, get the number of people the number of households that don't have access to a computer, how about that? You can, once you have the data on the map, you can choose to download, and it opens up this very simple interface to do just that. Just understand that this sidebar that we call it is synced to the legend. So the download right now is going to download the percentage of people without health insurance, but we want to change this to the number of people that don't have a computer. And so we can change this to the number in that case. And then the download would be a list of all the census tracts that are contained within your radius and the number of persons in each one of those tracts that don't have health insurance. I apologize, but don't have a computer. And then the last really unique feature of the map tool that I'll show you is the ability to do what we call spatial analytics. And really the purpose of that is that instead of just looking at one layer at a time, maybe you want to see the relationship of persons that don't have a computer to maybe those that speak different languages that are non-English or so, just to understand that maybe if there's a way those two data sets can connect to each other. And that's switching from what we call the single layer map, which is to the top here, to a multi-layer map. And so we go back to access to a computer. Just reset all this here. And the way it basically works is that the single layer maps, the goal of this page is to show you the one layer that you're looking at and the different colors. And the colors represent the different ranges that are in the legend itself. And that's really how single layer works. But when you wanted to see how maybe multiple layers or multiple data sets look on top of each other or intersect with each other, the multi-layer maps allows you to do just that. And what it does is, though, it changes from multiple colors to just one color. And that one color then is up to you to determine the ranges that are being shown. So in the case of households without a computer, it's a full range from 0 to 100, and we can adjust these numbers based on the value itself, or even just type them in to the numbers. And understand that the left is greater than, and the right, of course, is less than. So we were to say, I want to find places that have greater than maybe 20% of the households that don't have a computer. So the map redraws, and only places that have at least 20% of the households do not have a computer will be visible in that range. And then from this, we can add another layer to the map. And so we can say, of this, how many households speak? Let's turn this off. And if we're looking over maybe a specific language that we're trying to address, or again, if we were to remove other layers. Actually, there's a better one to look at. So that way we can look at as a percentage. So this is a percentage of households 5 or older, or persons at 5 or older that do not speak English. So this value starts at 0 and it maxes at 92%. And again, we can adjust this number and say, let's find places that have at least 10% of the persons don't speak Spanish at home or speak English at home. So now only places that meet both criteria of don't have access to a computer and at least 10% of the persons do not speak English at those homes. So this gives you a very unique map if you know your neighborhoods. This allows you to look at these very unique neighborhoods or spots and identify some criteria that might be useful for those places. You can add up to 5 layers in this. You can really drill down to a place based on different data sets that you want to compare against. I used 2 and 6 as our basic example. The other really neat thing about the query is initially this query, the goal of this is to help you find these very specific places that you're looking to identify. And with that, at least you have a better understanding of each one of these individual neighborhoods that match with this criteria. But sometimes the surrounding neighborhoods, as you click onto it, you can still see the values and see the ones that did not meet the criteria. Sometimes the surrounding neighborhood is just as important, and it'll give you a little more context. So you can change the query that's being done in the multi-layer maps from what we call an AND function, which is the intersection of data, to an OR function, which is the overlap of that data. And then what you'll get is all the places in the blue are places that meet the criteria of households, at least 20% of the households don't have a computer. whereas all the places with a hash are areas that have at least 10% of the persons that do not speak English in those areas. So you still see the places that meet the two criteria, but then you also start seeing some of their surrounding neighborhoods and how a little bit different those neighborhoods are based on their coverage. So these two very different neighborhoods, this side here do not have access to a computer, but they have access, but they speak, they have a higher population that speak English in there. Whereas on the other side of this neighborhood, this is an area that is access to a computer, but a higher percentage of people that don't speak English in those areas. And then as with anything in Policy Map, you can print this out and save it as well. And then the last thing I sort of want to cover is just the save feature itself. And in this case, this allows you to save anything in Policy Map you create, maps, reports, your custom boundaries and such. And then when you save it, it'll save it in each one of these sections, as well as make a custom project. And this allows you to make a project that you can group together things like a custom region for that project, a report for that project, multi-layer maps, regular maps and such. The neat feature about Save is that it saves your work into your account indefinitely. So if you want to come back to this analysis next year and see the updated information or just rerun your analysis, save it into your accounts, and that way you can always access the overall work later on. All right, so that's my entire session. I do try to cover a little too much sometimes, but hopefully it gives you some highlights of how to use the tools. Is there any data in particular you want me to talk about or features? I'm happy to as well. Okay, so yeah, I mean, we definitely encourage a little bit of exploration when it comes to using the tool. There's quite a bit of information and data to interact with. Again, demographics is a really neat way to look at the overall persons of a given area. Income and spending is probably a variable you are familiar with when it comes to just general income and such, but as you get further into some of these categories, you'll start seeing some really cool indexes and calculations. So affordability index, we call it, food nutrition index, we call it, and it just depends on how you want to understand a given neighborhood. Each one of these types of data sets really can add more information about that information for those places. Okay, all right, and otherwise, if you have any questions as you use the tool, definitely look at the support link in the very top. This will take you to a tutorial page of all the different features that we've talked about. And then of course, the feedback actually allows you to just send a very quick question to our team. And that way, if it's anything in particular, be it data or features or things you're looking for that might not be covered in here, let us know. And we're happy to dig through some of these functionalities. Okay, well then thank you so much for your time this afternoon and learning a little bit about this policy map tool. Yeah, we'll share this link along with everyone. And if you have any questions, please let us know.